Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting it raw. Let me just say Happy New Year to everyone, and thank you for joining me on the podcast. The first episode of 2023. And this week's podcast episode is with Elizabeth Briel. She's an artist who's come from the US, but is now currently in Hong Kong. Join us, listen in, and be inspired, because Elizabeth is a practicing artist who is so committed and is truly just astounding. I'm obviously a big fan, so check it out. Enjoy. Check out her work. Thanks.
For me, photography is a sketchbook. It's how I kind of capture the world around me and how I try and understand where I am, having lived like you in a lot of countries that I'm maybe not originally from. It's almost like it's an aide-memoire. It's a sketchbook. It's a way to just kind of sort out where I am. And I've edited a photo book and I've contributed to a photo book. And that process of working with professional photographers as well as amateurs was really enlightening to see how they used it in such different ways. And actually, these art supplies that was just delivered by a robot to my room was courtesy of Jo Farrell, who's a photographer in Hong Kong. And she was the first person to say, hey, if you need art supplies, she said, I'll get it to you. And it just arrived 5 minutes ago.
Okay, Elizabeth Briel, am I saying it? Briel? Okay.
Yeah.
Welcome to Shooting It Raw. Welcome to the podcast. Our paths crossed in a kind of happy accident, and I'm really pleased because I was able to discover your work and the intersection of your life and where you are and my life and where I am is kind of funny. And well, it'll emerge, why you are the perfect person to have on the podcast right now. And let's just dive right in. So the first picture photo I think we should discuss is ventilation painting completed in quarantine, water-soluble graphite on paper, 50 centimeters by 300 centimeters. So that's 3 meters. If you're American, that's about 3 yards. It's roughly more or less monochromatic. It's like a warm black and white. In the top left-hand corner, it looks like, I don't know, like some kind of seat, some kind of like love seat, I guess. There seems to be a purse, I guess.
It's actually the bed.
Oh, okay, so the bed. So there's a bed. There seems to be a purse or something on the floor. The floor is all tile, some kind of nice granite or something. And from the wall in the back, leading right down to the photographer, so it looks like it's about 3 meters long. Even actually, it looks longer than that. Is this recurring print of this? It looks like a tile almost, and I think you'll describe what it is. It's a very, it's a documentative photograph, beautifully composed in its own way. Actually, this is the image that caught my attention. I thought, oh, wait a second, what is this about? And then it was a photo, I think, of you on Facebook saying something about quarantine. I was like, oh, wait, what is this? And then I had to look again. And so please, what's the story behind this photo?
Bear with me as well, because I think our connection's a bit unstable. Also from my end, the internet here has been hit or miss. And when you're stuck in a room for 3 weeks and your connection to the world is through the internet, you wonder why the whole floor is not in mutiny. I'll talk more about quarantine later, but about this image that you're describing so well, it's actually part of a series of about 50 paintings I'm doing. I live in Sham Shui Po. To give a little background information, I'm an American artist based in Hong Kong, immigrating here. I've been in Asia 17 years, in Hong Kong for total 6.5. And I live in a Tong Lao. It's a 9th floor walk-up, very traditional architecture. And inside, the walls don't actually reach the ceiling of the bedrooms, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Instead of the walls reaching the ceiling, you have these kind of iron lattices that you see in straight Chinese architecture and in, kind of lower middle class housing of the era, mid 20th century. And that's what this particular image is of. I literally, for every single door and window and grate in my house that lets air in and lets air circulate, I press against it, I create an imprint, and then I trace that pattern with water-soluble graphite, which is basically like pencil dust, kind of.
Mm-hmm.
So I take this dust, and it's like pencil dust, and I mix it with water, and then I use it like paint. I'm trained as a painter. I work as artist in residence with an international school here. And so I tend to have the space to do large-scale work like this. This is my first time working in such a small space with a big piece. Painting it on the floor was pretty difficult, as you can imagine. But, if you set yourself up to do something, you just do it, right? You don't kind of give yourself a choice. Because I knew I was going to have a couple weeks here. And I had this series I started basically like you. I was really impressed with your 6.5 years project. Similarly, a lot of my work incorporates times. So for this particular series, it's actually 50 paintings that create an installation called the ventilation paintings. And I started them around February, March last year, which was a long time ago. But it was basically the beginning of the pandemic. And I'm finishing it now in quarantine. And so for me, that's an arc of time. It's a little under a year. And it has real meaning for me. And all these, images in the series, which look like traditional Kowloon windows, etc., they are basically tracing the negative space where air comes in, where the building breathes. Because when the pandemic started, I was thinking a lot of Wuhan. I lived in northern China for 4 years in Beijing, and the winters there are really gray and polluted and kind of oppressive. And you saw this drone footage of Wuhan at the beginning of the epidemic. I thought, I know what that air tastes like. It tastes like graphite. It tastes like metal. It looks like that. It feels like that. And that's why I decided to use that kind of, honestly, not terribly interesting color, gray, in this work. But actually, partly because I'm in quarantine here and I don't have access to this special material, I'm being really stingy with it. So it forces me to use it in more creative ways. And so the photo, as you see it, it's actually stretched along the floor. I wanted to show how the pattern changes with the perspective of it, and also the edge of the bed. So you see this like purple kind of cheap bed skirt on the hotel room bed, and then the artwork kind of drapes along the floor. And it gives this dramatic sense of impact because it's so long in this really confined space.
Okay, so many things to say. I love it. Okay, so
it's a lot.
No, it's perfect. First of all, I love that I'm speaking to somebody who's clearly immersed herself in art. And so how you talk about your work, how you talk about thinking about your work, and how you talk about how you got to finding a way to express yourself visually, for me is always, like when I asked you to join me on the podcast, I said, it's going to be so fun to just talk shop. From what you said, you're essentially, what you've done is you've captured the imprint of the building breathing, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I love it. My first degree was in poetry, in creative writing and poetry. And
wow,
it's all about the breath and about the voice, but the breath was so important. And in a way that you've visually captured this it's quite beautiful.
There are a couple other elements to that aspect of breathing. One was that at the time when I started the series, I was thinking a lot about the people on ventilators in China and also in Italy at the time. As that was beginning, I was thinking they're breathing. They're struggling to breathe. I was thinking of the word ventilation and what that means in different contexts. And also the inherent fragility of architecture in Hong Kong and other places where architecture is so transient. So the building I'm in was due to be torn down next year. They've stopped it for now, but in a couple of years it'll be torn down. So in a sense, I'm documenting this place that's going to be gone. And all that will be left of it is these artworks that I've made of it, which were a physical contact between the metal, my hand, my skin, and the paper.
Also, for as a visual cue, it almost looks like these reflected human forms standing, and it looks like people essentially holding up the wall or the floor. I don't know if that's just what I saw as a visual connection.
That really makes a lot of sense. Yeah, the repetitive pattern of it. And I've been told actually that this is quite a form that was used in British colonies in the mid-20th century, from Hong Kong to Cyprus even. In Cyprus, you have the exact same design used in the same way. Yeah. And you almost never see it anymore because it's all been torn down for most places. But I live in a time capsule, essentially, in Shamsui-po.
Okay, so for people who don't know, now, okay, so this is one thing, because we've never met, and this is our first time meeting and talking. You don't actually live in Sham Shui Po, or you do live in Sham Shui Po?
I do live in Sham Shui Po.
Okay.
Yeah, I've lived there for 4 years.
Okay. I've used this phrase on the podcast before when I describe being in the thick of it. So in Israel, you call the juice of the garbage. It's like, if you have a garbage bag, the juice of the garbage is really like is like in the middle, in the thick of it. And I consider Sham Shui Po to be the more interesting juice of Hong Kong's garbage. Like, it's really full on.
It really is. And I chose to live there deliberately for a number of reasons. Partly because after moving back to Hong Kong, I'd lived in Beijing for 4.5 years. I wanted to be somewhere really Chinese, really kind of what seemed like at the heart of Cantonese culture. And I currently live on that fabric street, where I'm not romantic about fabrics, but the energy and the activity there during the daytime, you've got fabric stalls lining the street. At nighttime, it's basically gamblers everywhere on the street, since the pandemic especially. It's got life 24/7, and yet it's much quieter than where I'm staying in Hong Kong Island, So it's got so much richness to it and so much depth. Yeah.
You did the work in your apartment, but you are in quarantine in Causeway Bay?
Yeah, so you're wondering, how did you get here, right? Good question. So what I did is, the reason I'm in quarantine, which will come up a little bit later with the final image, is I went to Turkey. I went to Istanbul for about a week, a little over a week, to see a collaborator there, someone pretty special. And I took the artwork with me. So I had about 25 paintings, 20 pieces of paper that already had the impressions on them, and the art supplies. I have this huge tube. It's about 1 meter tall, maybe by 20 centimeters wide. And that's what I bring all of my artwork in when I have a show overseas, or taking it. You can check it pretty easily into luggage, and I brought it with me. It gets a lot of looks from airport security. They're like, what is in there? Is it a gun?
Yeah. Okay. Now I get it. So basically the floor is in the hotel where you're at the moment in quarantine?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
Let's move on to the next image and just see what pops over from there. The next image I have it's view of Happy Valley from day 5 of quarantine. How about you describe what the image is of? So somebody listening could be like, oh, okay, they can picture it.
It's really strange. You don't get a view like this a whole lot in Hong Kong. So if you look outside, there's this kind of green field. It looks like a playing field of some sort, quite open, with a bunch of buildings around it from the 70s through the early 2000s, probably. And so you actually get a pretty good perspective of it. But the window down at the bottom is quite dusty, and that's why I chose this image, because you have the city's filth a little bit on the outside of the window that looks like something really beautiful and kind of hazy and misty. And I chose this because it's so bizarre to wake up in this place, which is a place of isolation and, in fact, imprisonment in a way, because if I leave, I could be thrown in prison and fined 25,000 Hong Kong dollars, if I leave this room, right? So it is an enforced quarantine. And it's so beautiful outside, and this place is called Happy Valley. It's the dissonance. It's really striking. Yeah, so that's why I chose that photo. That this is my view every day. I take a different image of it. And tonight is Wednesday, and that's horse racing night, apparently. And they still have the races on, I heard. So I'm going to try and photograph.
Oh, they still do?
I heard that, yeah, on Twitter anyway,
So one of the reasons why I was really hoping to get you on the podcast is because the previous episode was with my sister, who's a physician in Georgia, in the U.S., in Savannah, Georgia. And she found out she had COVID. And then her whole family was tested and they have COVID. And in the U.S., the approach, look, we can't compare Hong Kong, which is a city, to US, which is a country,
nope.
Right? It's not apples to apples. But in Hong Kong, there's a much stricter quarantine response, operational, standard operating procedure, whatever you want to call it. So the image is, let me just go back to it. So the anchor is, okay, so it's essentially the top half of it is the sky with a bit of cloud. The horizon, there's no horizon because it's broken by Hong Kong hillsides. And Hong Kong's hillsides, if you've ever been, are incredible. Essentially, in the summer, it's full-on jungle. And right now, it's a dry season. So it's not quite as green, but still super green. there's this thing in cities, I don't remember what it's called, but essentially what it does is it measures how many skyscrapers there are per whatever it is. And Hong Kong's has the highest density of skyscrapers, of very tall buildings. And
Yes.
so the image that you have, as you say, the bottom is like the filth of it. It makes the bottom of the frame almost sketched. It almost looks like a runny watercolor painting.
Yeah.
And then as it bleeds upward, you see all these small buildings. What you can't see is the race course, which in Happy Valley, as you say, it's a funny title for where you're living. It's a really amazing sight because it's this incredible stretch of perfect green grass, which in Hong Kong is very rare. People don't have lawns.
Extremely valuable as well.
Yes, of course. Yeah, so that's the image. And I'm sure it must be very surreal for you to be in this kind of prison sense. So in the previous episode, we heard about, and I'm totally made fun of my sister, unfairly, but she is my sister.
You did. I love that episode. It was hilarious.
Good. She made it sound like she's really like, the horror. Okay, so that was her experience. Now, why don't you walk listeners through your experience of landing from Istanbul and what it was like to be processed, what it was like for you to land and then to go through the test. I'm assuming testing. So yeah, what was...
Actually, I wanted to start with some of what your sister said, which I thought was fascinating.
Sure.
That whole sense of shame and filth, as though you are untouchable. And I've been feeling that here, honestly, the entire time since even before arriving. When I was away... So I left on, I believe it was 19th of December, and I returned on it was due to return on the 29th, I believe. With travel time, it was just over a week in Istanbul. However, while I was away, Hong Kong decided to increase the quarantine time from 2 to 3 weeks, which meant I would be a week later for work. And then also, I had 3 flights to try to get home. The first one was canceled. It flew to Hong Kong empty from Istanbul. The second one, they would not allow me or the other Hong Kong passengers to board. They wouldn't let us board, and they wouldn't tell us why. They came up with a lot of lies. So finally, thank goodness, I hope you don't mind me saying, but Qatar Airways was amazing, and they were the 3rd flight, and they finally allowed us to get in, and they were incredibly professional the whole time. All the documents had to be checked, and I've taken 4 COVID tests so far because of this trip. The first before I left for Istanbul, because as a responsible traveler, I felt I needed to make sure I didn't have it, even though it was not required for travel to Turkey. The second, before leaving for Hong Kong, and then because my flights were delayed, I had to take another one at the Istanbul airport. So that was 3, and then 1 on arrival in Hong Kong, and then I will have 2 more before leaving the hotel. So it's like a month for a 1-week trip. Yeah.
Wow.
It's been quite an experience. Then when you arrive in Hong Kong, Hong Kong administration, is so efficient and but it is, everybody's wearing PPE. You're treated like pariahs. You're treated, and also, to be honest, I will say people who know me here, some people, early on in the pandemic, there was a lot of righteousness about mask wearing. And of course I wear my mask constantly. However, that has shifted over time to, if you travel, you're being really irresponsible and you're doing bad things. And, this is not leisure travel going through this. You only do this if you really need to be somewhere. And I was I'll tell you a little more about that in Turkey, but I was going for someone really special, and I wouldn't have done this for pretty much anybody. But I wanted to see if this collaboration could work. And it was pretty important that I go. So yeah, there was also that kind of area of, the whole trip being a bit difficult as well. So when you arrive, you're kind of herded through with other passengers and all these things. You're made to wait. You have an area to sit in after your test, and it's all incredibly efficient. Everything is checked impeccably from before you leave. Actually, somebody at Qatar Airways, as they were checking my documents for like the 50th time, they said it's as difficult to get to Hong Kong as to get to Pluto. They said Hong Kong is the most difficult country to deal with.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But you know what? They said that was respect, because they know that Hong Kong is really trying to protect its people. So, and I understand that. And, whatever. I feel how I feel about this, but I respect the rules of Hong Kong, and I would never.
Right. No, I understand that.
Yeah, and then you wait, and then you're put in transport, but it's like quarantine transport. So these vans are disinfected after every time, and you're herded into the hotel. And now I'm on a quarantine floor with separate ventilation. Everybody here is in quarantine. I think maybe the rooms are half full. I just had, we have delivery 3 times a day of food. You cannot choose when it is. They just hang it on your door. They knock and then they get away before you can open it. I give them a minute to do that. And
wow.
Yeah, you really feel dirty, and you know what? We're a biohazard, so I get that.
Hold on. Okay, now, okay. So many words want to come out of my mouth. Okay, one second. You're not COVID positive, though.
I have never tested positive yet, but it could.
Okay.
It could, theoretically, because it couldn't, maybe the viral load wasn't high enough or whatever. It's pretty unlikely, but yeah.
Describe how much square feet of space you have, roughly. At least you have a window, but describe the size of your cell.
That's a good question. My cell, I should call it my cell. 200 square feet. And I thought that's actually pretty big compared to some of the hotels I was looking at in my price range.
Oh, you have to pay yourself.
Yeah. It didn't used to have to be, but then Hong Kong changed that in November. You could no longer do home quarantine. When I booked this trip, it was 14 days home quarantine. I thought, okay, great, that fits in my budget. Then it was hotel quarantine, and then they changed it to 3 weeks. So it's 4 times more expensive than my original budget. Yeah, right? I'm an artist as well. I'm not like some businesswoman. But, you make it, I earn a steady salary, so I can deal with it. So 200 square feet. But like that last photo I sent you was my old flat, which was 150 square feet. And I lived happily in there for 2 years. So I'm used to small spaces. Yeah.
Vent your feelings in terms of, as an artist, and however you want to take this question, interpretation of this forced closure, almost like punishment.
Yeah, and it's not over yet.
Mm-hmm.
It's a deterrent. I think that's a large part of the measure here. It's a deterrent for people to travel frivolously.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the government thought there were a lot of people traveling who perhaps didn't need to and shouldn't have been traveling. And that was blamed for an increase of cases. Whether that's right or not, okay, to be honest, I think they were exaggerating on how many imported cases were being brought in. And then they tried a bunch of policies to mitigate. A lot were coming from certain areas of the world. So they made those people stay in forced quarantine, whereas other people could quarantine at home. And it was seen as kind of racist because it's from South Asia, South Africa, those travelers. And then there was just a big mess up. It was a big mess. And then quite recently we had this dance cluster, which was well-to-do. There were over 700 cases, I think, of well-to-do people in Hong Kong who were spreading it quite intensely among one another. And many more than any travelers were coming in, but yet to deflect attention from that, they were again pointing at travelers as the issue. Now, okay, I've worked in the travel industry. I know how it works. It's very destructive to the environment, and I get that. I think we need to rethink travel as an industry. And I will also say that as my position I'm single-ish. I don't have kids. My mom and my family are taken care of back in the States. And I don't have a lot of the worries that most people do. If I need to, I just deal with it. And I really try to just say, okay, my room has windows that open. It's a miracle,
sure.
Because I wasn't expecting that. That would have been really hard for me. I heard that's really difficult. And the windows are really big and there's open space. So I really try hard to just, okay, this is a crap situation, but who am I to complain? I'm living in a first world country. I have a bachelor's degree, only a bachelor's degree, but I'm so lucky in my life to be here. And also to be in a city that people, I'm sure the government's doing their bit, whatever we may think about that, but it's the Hong Kong people who are making the city safe. And I'm so lucky, like you, to live in a place like this, that people keep one another safe because of their behavior. And that's what I really tried to focus on. However, my collaborator in Athens, who I met in Istanbul, he has a business. He has an art space, a couple art spaces there, and it's suffering. They can't have shows. They can't have openings. I have an art studio here at the JCCAC, the Hong Kong Creative Arts Center. I had workshops planned, all sorts of things, cannot do any of it. However, the Hong Kong government has reduced my rent by 75%. I just try to look at the bright side of things, but I also empathize with other people. Business owners are having it so hard. They're really stuck.
Yeah. It's full on. That's the thing. Hong Kong is probably one of the best places to be during this pandemic. So let's move on to a happier photo. The other photo you sent, it looks like a shopping cart with, or just actually, no, it's one of those baskets. Yeah. So it's a basket. It's called Spice of Life.
Yeah.
Chilies in, is it Beyoğlu? Istanbul?
Yeah.
And it's those super dried chilies, very, very wrinkled. The image is just taken from the top, looking down. They're probably, I mean, whatever. There's probably hundreds of, let's just say, of these dried chilies. It's a nice image. It's, not especially arresting as a photograph. So, but what?
It's not creative at all.
But wait, how is it representative? What is it communicating for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. So this is just your typical kind of tourist image of, oh, the food is so good in Istanbul and the ingredients that go into the food are so amazing. But really, to me, that sums up kind of the experience overall. So a few months ago, I started collaborating with this artist, gallery owner / residency director in Athens. We're the same age. We're both born in California, but we've lived in France, and his dad is from Shanghai and just has a very similar complementary background to mine. And we started talking. And then he said in October, oh, why don't we meet? I said, well, you can't come to Hong Kong and I can't come to Europe because they won't let Americans in. And we said, well, where could we meet? Istanbul or Croatia? And so we chose Istanbul just to meet and see if these collaborations that we discussed could work and other collaborations maybe could work. So yeah, and we actually got the news that a grant that I'd applied for from the HKPU / JCCAC to put together a show in Athens next summer, that we got the grant. So we got, good news, and the collaboration is, anyway, it's going.
Oh, wicked.
But for me, really, yeah. And so to me, the chili is just, the image of that, it just represents unexpected. You never know what one of these chilies is going to taste like because they're all so different. The heat is different. The texture is different. How you chop it up, how you use it. And we just both took a chance. So when we booked the trip, it was pretty straightforward. It looked pretty straightforward. And then Greece cut off all flights to Turkey. They cut off all transportation to Turkey. Oh. He had to book 2 flights going and 2 flights back. He was delayed by 2 days going. And then I was delayed 3 days coming back because of flights. So it just ended up being this craziest travel experience ever. For just a week.
A hot mess. A big pile of hot chili mess.
Yeah. But wonderful chili.
Nice.
So I love spicy food. And yeah, I have to say Turkish food or Eastern Mediterranean food is some of the best I've had in my life. It's just incredible.
Wicked. Because you're an artist, you've thought about visual expression, and do you normally work in, 2D? Do you do mixed media? Do you do walk us through your training as an artist?
Sure. So my background was in two-dimensional work, mostly painting and printmaking during university. I went to the University of Minnesota, where I lived in that state for 17 years. And then for the last about 15 years, I used a lot of alternative photo processes. Cyanotype was the main one, and then also Van Dyke printing, a bit of gum chromate. I really liked how the unpredictability of these elements work together. And now I tend to do different kinds of media, again, mostly two-dimensional, but also that work with architecture. And they spring from architecture and humans' interactions with architecture, and they wrap around architecture as well, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So I'm not usually interested in making something flat that hangs on a wall, but something very large scale that wraps around the wall, and you have to kind of move to interact with it and interface with it. So my day job is as artist in residence with an education foundation here. And so I design a lot of artworks that students can help me make. Okay. They're very large scale that give them kind of ownership of the space. That's my day job that allows me to live in one of the most expensive cities in the world. People are like, wow, do you have family money? You have a rich husband? No. Mm-hmm. It's just the grace of this job, Wicked. That I can do that. And so, yeah, it's 2D, but when you interact with it, it's kind of 3D. I have to think 3D in order to make it work with the architecture. If that makes sense. And it tends to be monochrome.
Okay. So first of all, you have a website. I'm going to put it up certainly the YouTube clip, and definitely where people can click on in the description. What is your website, please?
It's ebriel.com. First initial, last name.com.
Can you spell that?
Sure. EBRIEL.com.
Fantastic. Yeah. So look, let's get more people to look at your work. So for example, let's just say there's a timeline, there's an arc, whatever you want to call it, right? In my day job, I do things like leadership training, leadership coaching. In terms of service leadership, in terms of doing this work, okay, so there's this arc, right? We start, we develop, and as we progress through life, we get more experience and all this stuff. So why don't you take us through the journey of your development on your website? I can only imagine that you've grouped your work. If you have a lot of work, it's going to group it in terms of themes, right? Has there been a progression in terms of the thematics of what you've done? So you're talking about how you've been on this 1-year project, roughly aligned with the pandemic, that culminated recently with that work. So how have those themes progressed?
That's a really good question. And I will say about my website, it's basically kind of a holding storage. And a lot of my older work is not on it because I don't really like it anymore. It doesn't have a lot to do with what I'm doing now. So you won't see a whole lot of that on there. You will actually see, can I just pitch my Instagram as well? Which
Do it.
I thought I put it in. Yeah, okay. So my Instagram is basically similar. It's Briel Art. So it's E, B as in boy, R, IEL, ART. And that's my Instagram. And there you can find updated things, what I'm working on. We can follow one another, etc. I follow a lot of Hong Kong artists on that. I would say probably the journey of my art has also followed my art life journey, as it does with many artists. It's been through a lot of countries. So like I did an apprenticeship in Italy and another in, so when I was younger, I would go to Europe to learn things basically as a student. Self-financed, and then as I got older, I always said, hey, there's this amazing continent out here, Asia. I don't know a lot about it. Aside from what I read, I need to experience it. How can I afford to go there? I'll go there as an English teacher. And that's how I started in Asia. But I always wanted to be working with art in some way, not just as a studio artist, but in the world. And having a reciprocal relationship with where I am and the places and the people of where I am. And over time, that has really changed a lot from kind of illustrative work, which was a lot of portraits and honestly work that I really don't like anymore, kind of old fashioned, and then working more conceptually with text and different languages as I was learning new languages and learning Chinese, Mandarin in Beijing, and then photography, but in a more painterly way with alternative photochemistry. And then I really got interested in how did the sun in Cambodia, where I was living, how does it interact differently with this chemistry than in Hong Kong, where I lived afterwards? And so all these things, these nuances, and that's where I became really aware of this place, this time, it's unique. And that's what this pandemic is as well right now. And that's why I'm making the work here right now.
Yeah. No, don't let me interrupt. I'm just kind of responding. I'm just saying, yes, full on, yes.
And I also became, along the way, quite preoccupied with what they call material culture, which is, in an art sense, you bring in anthropology, who makes these art materials that you are working with and how. And for me, that became part of the story of what I'm using and why. It became part of the work implicitly, because I always picture who made this. What are their lives like? Without them, I couldn't make this work. And it became a way of kind of reaching out with the communities that I was in. And then I was commissioned to research the handmade paper of Southeast Asia from my publisher and then wrote about that. And that led me to actually one of the projects at my studio in Hong Kong at JCCAC called Art Materialist, which is essentially bringing art materials to the forefront, looking at them in different ways and talking to people who make them and use them in different ways. Anything from anthropologists to dyers and all sorts of things, which has led to other things. I think about art not just as a painter sitting in the studio, but art in the world, art interacting with people. I couldn't make it without them, even if it's mine. Yeah.
One thing you had mentioned earlier about you had lived in Beijing and say or in northern China or whatever, and walking around, and I've also been to Beijing, and I'd gone just to do a kind of a research trip on electric motorcycles, and where the plant was based was in the middle of this industrial area, and when I landed there, it was literally ash, post-apocalyptic sky. You could taste the grit. You could taste the. I know. Yeah. So when you said, you could kind of taste it was like this weird carbon taste in the air. Yeah,
Mhm.
yes, I know that. Yeah, and in a weird way, when you describe that, and then looking at the print, which is essentially when you imprinted the paper, and then afterward went over it with the brush,
Exactly.
it's almost like you applied the artifact, after the fact to say, well, this is how the breadth of the building showed up. So when you connected that to living in Beijing and I was just like, yeah, that definitely, if you've been there, you know what that feels like.
Especially around Chinese New Year. So around that time, everybody's left town. They've got fireworks at the time. Fireworks were going off everywhere. Ash raining through the air. It was the most post-apocalyptic. The only thing that kept me going were the little oranges. They're so good in the winter. They're so sweet. But it's still like that during an apocalypse. They don't happen often anymore. But yeah, you can taste it.
Absolutely. And as we're talking about this, I've got this image of the chilies in front of my face. One of the one of the little clips I have on the Facebook page for Shooting It Raw is of me trying a scorpion pepper, and it's supposed to be one of the spiciest peppers. So I eat half of one. So it gave me a panic attack, but as they do. Let's pick the next photo. You want to move on to the next photo because you sent it to me just before the call. Let me just describe it. So what we have is, okay, so the on the left and sort of going forward with the perspective is the kind of like window after window after window. So it's a very bright room. So it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So 10 rectangular windows. So the whole wall, which is kind of curved, is like more than half of the wall is just window. And the bottom is this light blue. The floor is this kind of, I don't know if it's wood or if it's fake wood.
Fake wood.
Fake wood, okay. But in a weird way, cutting the perspective is these metal, I guess, what are they called? Like sliding doors, and that are brown. So and so behind the windows, you see like the classic Hong Kong buildings that kind of pull up in various colors and stuff, and they're more muted, kind of gray white, because outside is a cloudy day. Inside, on one of the sliding doors, are these, it looks like photographs of buildings. So it reinforces the feeling of what's outside is actually on the inside, yet what's inside is much crisper and cleaner. So you sent this image through and you said, oh, we could also talk about this one. And so what is this particular image?
So this actually leads into the final kind of aspect of this project, which I'll just talk a little about this. So I had a space for about a year and a half. I put on sporadic shows of mostly Hong Kong artists called Creative Kowloon. And this was from the first show. So this was my old flat. The last day of that flat, I cleaned it out that night. All the furniture had been moved into the new one. And I decided to use it as an art space with the art inside that I had made using the windows of that flat and from the perspective of that flat. So I had 2 series actually hanging in the room at that time, both of which had been made inside that flat of the landscape, the cityscape around that flat. So first of all, it was one of those composite buildings, which is the round building. Mm-hmm. So you get a perspective of a city that is unlike anything else. And so often we take photos of the outside of buildings in Hong Kong, especially the more kind of working class buildings. A lot of Western photographers don't get in them because we don't tend to live in them, but I did because it's affordable and I found the right space. There's 150 square feet, and I lived really happily there for about 2 years until I found this new space, which was much bigger for just a little bit more money. And so I made 2 series, one of which was the reflections of the windows. So it was like a double exposure, but it was actually a reflection in the glass as well. And that gives you a different optic look and color that you can't get with the double exposure.
Right.
It's quite interesting. And then the other was the cyanotype prints that I took over 2 years. I made them from the windows. So essentially, I turned the windows into alternative process printing plates, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I had these large-scale papers that I coated with these alternative chemicals. And then on the longest and shortest days of the year, on the winter and spring solstice, I left those papers in front to soak in all the sunlight from that day. So these papers contain in them all the sunlight of that day, the chemical reaction of that. And again, that's my obsession with place and time and that uniqueness of it, which I'm also applying to the pandemic painting today. So that was, 2 years I called those. I forget what I call that series now, but it's a little bit of it is up on my website. You get these crazy effects because of those Kowloon windows. It's very distinctive. The reason I wanted to include that photo is because in this little hotel room, which is a little bit bigger, I'm going to have, in about a week, I'm going to have a virtual exhibition, a quarantine exhibition of the work I've been making here. Mm-hmm. So I'll be hanging it. I've just arranged, that's what these art supplies are for. I've arranged to hang, that's why I'm not saying the hotel room right now, or the hotel name. I'm going to hang it on the walls, and then I'll have an exhibition of the work made in quarantine that I'll share with people. How will that happen? I'm still figuring that out. But the idea is to display this and also to just to bring the home, which is just across the city, but which feels like a world away, to bring the home here because it's the literal impressions of that home and the ventilation and the breathing that I'll be displaying here next week.
So good.
Yeah.
So good. Like
a lot to throw out there.
Okay, so for the people who don't know Hong Kong very well, you sound like a total alien. You are a complete alien in this society. Okay, just to go back to service leadership training, right? So what we say in our training is that most of what we learn in school, unfortunately, is functional. It's all about functional, we call it a dimension, but in a way, when you show up to do something, that's what people notice first, right? Your functional thing. And in Hong Kong, which is all about like the big industrial services, or not industrial services, but the big services, which are like banking, finance, legal, it's big money. It's kind of like people's soul hasn't gotten the time in the spotlight the way it has. Like, I came from Montreal, right? So in Montreal has such a vibrant art community. And
it's a beautiful city.
Yeah, it's a great city for that. But we left because on the other side, it was a hard place to live in, for you to career-wise and whatever. So Hong Kong is definitely a place where the arts have been very muted. And yet, so I've been here 17 years. And over time, in the time that I've been here, the arts community has begun to kind of flourish. And I wonder if that link is because people have more time and out of necessity are thinking more about, well, there's more to life than just money. There's also expression and becoming self-expressed. And so what is your experience as an artist / community educator? I'm calling you a community educator in the sense that you're awakening people to this notion of, well, hold on a second. You have to think about your place around you. And in a way, your art is kind of turning the environment into that kind of gallery. I'm trying to articulate something maybe very inelegantly, but hopefully you can understand a question and answer it. I'm putting this onus on you.
I'll do my best to answer it in the spirit in which it was said, which is, I mean that in the best of ways.
Sure.
And I ramble, and so just cut me off if it goes on for too long.
So go ahead.
That's a really good question. So I first moved to Hong Kong about 14 years ago, and I was here for 2 years, and I moved to Australia and other places, and then came back 4.5 years ago. So like you, I've seen Hong Kong change over the years. I noticed a huge change around 2008. Here, so structurally, that started to change around 2008 because of the introduction of the art fairs, etc. And I think when Hong Kong people saw, hey, you can make money with art, or somebody makes money with art. And so the prestige began to grow. And then around 2014, 2015, due to the protests, I think a lot of people began to ask themselves a lot of questions here. And it's not limited to the younger generation. There are a lot of conversations happening, I think, that were important and need to happen. If you're living somewhere in flux and change, what does being a Hong Konger mean? What do we want for our city? All those kind of things. And that's when I think we really saw a lot of people coming together, especially younger artists, making things happen. And yes, okay, as a foreign artist here, a Western artist, I will never be a Hong Kong artist. That's just how it is. There were post-colonial society. Even if my Cantonese was great, I still would not belong. And that's fine. But, you just have to accept, I have to accept that. Living here as an outsider. But I have a lot of great exchanges with Hong Kong artists. so much respect for what they're doing of different generations here. I think somebody who works in education, I'm a third generation educator. I don't have a teaching certificate because I'm not a teacher. I'm an artist in residence. So I work with kids from 2-year-old to university age with the foundation that I work for. We have 20 campuses in China and then several campuses around Hong Kong, which is how they can afford to employ somebody who's not a teacher. You know, my role is ambiguous, and I love that because I go into this classroom, which is its own ecosystem. I'm with them for 2 weeks. We work on something huge that basically gives them ownership of their space and makes them feel like they belong in a way, especially for students who maybe aren't always as academically minded. You know, they can often excel at art. And Hong Kong as a whole is realizing that no, money isn't enough. Money won't save you. You need money. And actually, Hong Kong taught me that, the importance of being really fiscally responsible. And I think more artists need to learn that, and how to just manage your money, think longer term about your future, and not have to be dependent on, you know, the welfare state or something. So Hong Kong was really good for that for me. So I think it goes both ways. And I'm really excited for the future, actually. And I say that a lot because I am committed I will be moving home base to Europe eventually, but I want to continue to have a studio base of some sort in Hong Kong. Have it be part of my life for the rest of my life. Yeah. Sure.
I hear you.
I hear Hong Kong people.
I hear you 100%. Elizabeth, this has been really, really good. I really enjoyed this. And so how many more days until you're released from prison? Prison with velvet walls.
So I'm on day 8 now.
Okay.
Day 8 of 21. So I still have a while longer. Basically, I have another week to finish this series, and then I'll exhibit it virtually for a week. I'm going to hang it on the wall of my hotel room while I work on a new series about confinement. Thinking a lot about confinement these days. Yeah. So we got a while. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful.
You've got an awesome view. And thank you. I really appreciate it. Okay, bye.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Okay, bye.
Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting it raw.